So hi, everybody. Welcome to our quick webinar, the Iran conflict and the operational risk. Maybe let's start with a quick introduction. I have here Sid from Grad, which is, I believe, is the biggest marine insurance company or mutual in the world. Is that correct, Sid?
That's right, Ami, and thank you for having us here.
Pleasure. Grad has been a long-term partner of ours, very close to people there. So Sid, you run loss prevention from Asia in Guard. So you must have had a lot of conversations the last couple of weeks with a lot of ship owners, operators, charters. Is that correct?
It's kept us very busy there.
I'm sure. Tom, like me, you're an ex-Navy guy. Please introduce yourself. And you're an OBE. Wow, that's impressive. How do you get to be an OBE?
So I saved a ship from sinking. It's a fine line between getting an OBE and being court-martialed in our Navy, but I managed to fall the right side of the line. But I was also involved in the US planning effort in the Straits of Hormuz back in the later end of my career. So I've seen this threat up close and personal.
Okay, I was in a ship that got hit by a missile, and I didn't get anything, by the way. And one of my ship got hit a reef, so I didn't get an OBE or OBI or anything like that. And Michelle, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself if there's anybody who doesn't know you already?
Good afternoon, everyone. Michelle Wiese Bockmann, Senior Marketing Analyst in my Senior Maritime Intelligence Analyst here at Windward, and long-time analyst of Maritime News and Affairs.
Okay, great. Welcome. I think, Michelle, you just came back from a conference in the US discussing some of these things, right? So you're going to share with us some insights about that.
Indeed, indeed.
It's great. And I think Peter from the UK Chamber of Shipping will be joining us shortly. You have me. I'm co-founder and CEO of Windward, and I'll be your host today. So the Maritime, too much. Okay, Maritime Security Snapshot. I think by now, all of you know, there's a bit of a conflict with Iran, Israel, maybe the US as well. In the Gulf, Donald Trump called it the 12-day war. I don't know. He said there's going to be peace is going to break, but 5 minutes afterwards, he said maybe there's another conflict next week. So we're going to stay and watch Truth Social to see in real time how is that unfolding. We want to talk today about what is happening, what has happened, and what we can learn from that on the future. What are the risks now? Maybe I'll hand over to Sid. Sid, from a maritime security and insurance perspective, what are you seeing?
No, thank you, Ami. Now, I'd like to start off with a very fundamental question. What is a high-risk area? Because everything sort of hinges on that. And in the industry, there are a lot of terminologies being used: a high-risk area, a war risk zone, an extended risk zone. And there are two points I'd like to make here. The first one is that all of us, whether in the marine industry or not, we generally have an idea of what it means, but there is no universally accepted definition. The second point is that context matters when we talk about the designation and demarcation of the areas. Now, let me explain this by starting with the insurance perspective, because that's the industry I come from. Now, what you're seeing on the screen is the map of the Persian Gulf right in the middle, and it has been marked with a red color with the arrows surrounding it. This is to indicate that this region, along with the northern part of the Gulf of Oman, is considered as a risk zone by the Joint War Committee. And I've put a screenshot of the circle on the right-hand side where the Persian and the Arabian Gulf has been highlighted in orange. Now, for insurers, what it means is if a vessel enters this listed zones, they will have to pay additional premium. Now, let's say the vessel or the owner pays up the additional premium, and the vessel enters the zone. The question then is, are the seafarers obliged to enter these zones? Well, and that's the next point I'd like to make here. I think the bottom of the screen is being hidden by some sort of a logo, but never mind. Second point here is from a seafarer's perspective. Now, they are signing the contracts with the ship owner, and their contracts define these risk zones completely differently. They may or may not mirror what you're seeing here on the screen from the Joint War Committee. And their rights, for example, payment of bonuses, right to refuse sailing, right to request repatriation, all depends on how these areas are defined in their contracts. I'll take the example of the ITF and the IBF. That's the International Transport Workers Federation. And they have listed a bunch of these areas around the world. Persian Gulf currently is not a listed risk zone within the ITF list for the crew contracts. So there is that inconsistency or discrepancy there. The Red Sea is. The third sort of stakeholder here would be the owners and the charterers combined, right? And the risk would really depend on the wording of the charter party clauses and the threshold there. So basically, for all different stakeholders, the definition of risk would differ. And Ami, I think there is another slide. If you can just go on to the next one. I'll just briefly explain, if that's okay, how we in the insurance look at the risk picture. And if you can just click on and get all the icons up. Now, when we're looking at the whole threat scenario in a given region, we're basically looking at what is the risk for the seafarers, the risk for the vessel and the cargo, the contractual concerns between the owners and the charterers, and lastly, the insurance implications. Now, we would also, of course, be tracking our portfolio in this region. And as of yesterday, we had 2.5% of all vessels insured by Grad that were in the Persian Gulf. Now, to assess the threat in a region like this where there are geopolitical conflicts, we would typically rely on security experts and the intelligence that they provide. And to give you all an example, I've taken a couple of screenshots to show how that might look. And this is from Vanguard. It makes it easy to, of course, digest information, but also gives us a very good overview of the entire threat scenario. And again, the keywords have been highlighted in orange. Starting with the top left, any vessel with a link or affiliation to Israel, of course, would be at a high threat when entering the Persian Gulf region. Right. The second one here on the list is the GNSS or the GPS interruption, and it's something I'm sure we will touch upon as we go along. The third one would be a collateral damage risk, which has been rated as substantial, and that goes for all the ships in the region. You could get caught in the conflict. You may not really be targeted. Right. There is, of course, the risk of the UAV attacks, and we saw that, I think, back in 2019. For some of the vessels in the Gulf of Oman. Then something we've seen over the years for vessels in the Persian Gulf is the seizure or detention by the Iranian National Guard. So this is generally the risk picture that we see, is something that has not been shown on the screen, and that complicates things further for us would be sanctions there. So yeah, with that overview, I'll pass it back to you, Ami.
I think that's very helpful. I forgot to say this discussion is under the Chatham House rules, so you can quote what we're saying, but you cannot attribute them. Thanks, Tom, for bringing me to the right definition of the Chatham House rules. Tom, from because you spent a bunch of years in the Navy, probably more than I did, by the way, and you spend also a bunch of time looking at the Straits of Hormuz and what does it mean if somebody tries to shut them down or not, and mining probably, and minesweepers and all that good stuff. What have you seen in the last 2 weeks versus what you've been preparing for in your previous roles? And what do you think it also means? Because I think according to our data in various reports, basically the Hormuz Straits are still open, have remained open. We've seen slowdown for about 30% of traffic. Obviously, about 20% of the world's energy goes through there. So take us through your expertise a bit. What should we be understanding in this list of risks? Where is this going?
I think what it means at the moment is that they are on best behavior. I think it's important to make it really clear just how Iran has built up its capability pretty much since sort of the late 80s and Operation Praying Mantis. It's configured its capabilities specifically to be hard to counter, and almost exactly for this kind of scenario. And they've spent billions and, like I say, 30 years working up to where we are now. So there's a temptation when you look at Israeli air dominance in the north, in the east-west corridor between Israel and Tehran, for example, and in fact just general air dominance across the region, to read that across to the maritime dominance that I'm about to describe. And that for me is a mistake. This equipment is still there. It's a long way for Israel to go to attrit it down, and they have made it very hard to do so, much like the Houthi models, and of course that's where the Houthis got it from. So just to go very briefly through what they've still got in the bank, we've talked about GPS jamming. That will come up. That's an easy one, and we know about boarding and sort of harassment. That we've seen plenty of time over the last.
And I think actually last week or 10 days ago, I actually have got reports from one of the journalists we're working with about a specific vessel under a U.S. flag, a car carrier that has been hailed by the Iranians to be boarded, and they managed to get away. So I know that it happened at least. I know it's not public knowledge, but it happened at least once. I have the details of the ship as well. So
yeah, I mean, I'm surprised it hasn't happened more often. Back to my point about them clearly being on best behavior. And I think again, it's the point you just made about the flag there is quite an important one as well when comparing it to the Red Sea, where the Houthis constantly said that they were only going to target X, Y, and Z, and in fact, when you do the stats, it was a little bit wider than that. There was always a sense that the Houthis never quite knew what they were aiming at. That will not be the case in the Straits of Hormuz. The Iranian situational awareness in the Straits of Hormuz and in the Gulf is very, very good. Of course, it's their home yard. And unlike
Sure.
Houthis, they've had much longer to prepare. So, but beneath the boarding and harassment, you've got their fast attack craft and fast inshore attack craft. And if you've been in and out of the Straits in a warship in the last 20 years, you'll know what they look like from very close range because they'll rush at you in the dozens and test your reactions. But there are over 1,000 of those now supplemented by USVs and uncrewed surface vessels. Then they've got the ballistic missiles again. Have achieved a bad reputation since the start of this conflict, probably worse than we gave them credit for when we were doing the maths back in the day, but they still have many of these short-range ones left and potentially down in the southern areas. And then you start getting into the really kind of offensive stuff like their midget submarines, the Yonos and the Gadirs, right? These are owned by the IRGCN to a large extent, and they carry heavyweight torpedoes. They sit in the strait and they hover into tide with a little impeller. And their job is to wait for the big juicy target to come past and unload a heavyweight torpedo undetected. And then, of course, the final one which does grab more attention, is the mining threat. Again, they have thousands of these, thousands of mines, hundreds of mine-laying vessels, normally just converted fishing boats with barrels on the back. The barrels open up and the mines fall out, and you've got your mine threat. So that's relevant because, of course, they don't actually need to even do it. They can just say they've done it. So we have this great long list of things which they could use to disrupt the strait. And I'll close off by going, I do want to make the point about disruption, not closing. We know that, I think geopolitically closure is very unlikely. They could do it with all that stuff I've just outlined. They really could. But we've always had the assumption that they wouldn't do it unless the regime had nothing else to lose. It was last chance saloon because it cripples them, it cripples China,
Sure,
and so on. So I think that's where we are now. I think they are for me unnervingly quiet, and I think that's probably because someone's told them to be.
So maybe to be sharp for a second, actually that reminds me a bit of the beginning of the Ukraine-Russia war, where there has been mining and merchant vessels getting attacked by missiles, and it wasn't completely closed, right? The trade over there. Is that correct, Michelle?
Yes, it is. Yes. Yeah.
So I think it's not a binary thing. It's not open or closed. I think the levers that they are being pulled in the market right now is rates, right? The VLCC's rates are going up 3 times, and you just you need to really care about that. There's a war risk insurance. It's cost. In other words, and it's risk. Because otherwise, I think it's deal costs. Yes, there are cargoes at almost at any cost, and obviously, the price of oil goes up in tension, right? So your profit tension as a trader goes up, because if you get $80 a barrel and you bought it at 60, then that's $20 more a barrel, right? So you have more money to distribute and still making money. So I wouldn't think of this as a binary close or open, but I think there's levers you can pull. Does that make sense to you, Michelle, from your experience as well?
Yeah, and we saw the oil price go down just as quickly as it's gone up, and we've also seen in terms of the freight costs, variable crude carrier rates went up to, I think, nearly $100,000 a day from about $25,000 a day. But now we're seeing fixtures failing at that level, and so we're seeing a lot of the air has come out of the market quite quickly. But it's a very febrile situation.
By the way, the shekel, the Israeli currency, has strengthened about 10%. maybe 15% since the war started, which is, I think unprecedented. And I think that gets me to GPS jamming. Tom, by the way, when you were in the Navy, have you seen this a lot, this jamming, or is this a new phenomenon for you?
Well, I haven't. I mean, I haven't been to sea through the Strait for 10 years, so yes, a relatively new phenomenon. We always insisted on old school navigation techniques in the Royal Navy. Wouldn't surprise you to hear. So this would not have caused us a problem, but it does seem to be causing some carriers a little bit of a problem. But no, relatively new in this area, I would say.
Sure. So just I'll explain. So GPS jamming is something we've seen increase a lot over the last 2 years or 3 years, I think. Actually, we saw it first with the Russia-Ukraine war, then we saw it in Syria, then we saw it in the Red Sea, and now we're seeing it. In the Gulf. We've seen 12,000 vessels affected in the last couple of weeks, which is a lot, by GPS jamming. These are tracks that have been jammed all over on the screen. It impacts the IS, but it also impacts the navigation system, as Sid would say in a second. I saw this graph today for the first time. I thought it was quite interesting, actually. So what you see is jamming over time. Is jamming affected vessels over time from, and you can see April 1st to June 17, and you see it peaking around the American attack in Fordo and dropping significantly from an average of, let's say, 300 vessels affected to a peak of 1,600 and back to about 300. And 97% of the jam signal was on land, actually. And you can see, by the way, it's interesting in the east and the west side. So it's both sides. So obviously there are American bases on the west, obviously. And is the Iranian bases on the east. Tom, from your military experience, why would people jam GPS?
I think it's just that I think probably well, it's a Russian learned lesson. You've already kind of alluded to that. I think the general failure to understand what allied nations have done in the last 10 years, perhaps longer, to be able to fight through GPS jamming. I think there's an over-assessment on their behalf of the confusion that it would cause warships and warfighting systems. It can do, but generally speaking, it doesn't. So yeah, all you end up really doing is spoofing AIS and jamming bridge nav systems, and nothing much more serious.
For what it's worth, by the way, I know some of the cheaper drones, for instance, actually do not have what's called inertial platforms. They do not need GPS. So cheaper equipment would only be GPS guided. So I think it would affect them. Absolutely agree with you. The Royal Navy ships would probably not be affected. Sid, from your perspective, and I'll go back to that in a second. What are you seeing with this GPS? What's the impact for insurance? Are you seeing captains respond to that? Just ignore that? We had a big collision, the Frontline Eagle, right in the whatever, Al Dayan, I'm not sure what their name is. Anyway, the other quasi-Russian vessels over there. And they're saying it's not even related. Is it not? Doesn't really matter. What is the impact of this mass jamming that is happening?
Now, so Ami, I mean, I've been a seafarer for 15 years, been to Persian Gulf a lot, both as a cadet and as a master. And GPS jamming now is not a theoretical threat anymore. And we in Grad are handling claims because of that already. We've handled claims in Eastern Med waters. We've handled claims in the Red Sea. Luckily, none in the Persian Gulf so far. Now, when a vessel loses its GPS signal, right, the most obvious risk would that be of grounding, because the vessel then goes off track because they're navigating blind. And we've had quite a few cases of grounding, and that's the one I'm sort of showing on the screen on the left-hand side. And the cases we've had, they've been a lot of similarities. First of all, the port did have a circular saying that we are protecting our infrastructure from drone attacks. Hence, when approaching port, you could face GPS disruption. So it's a threat or a risk which perhaps the owners or the master and the crew were or should have been aware of. Right? So the incidents we've had were while approaching port, and the crew did notice the loss of GPS signal well in time. Decision was taken, of course, to continue the voyage and to make the port call. When they used the GPS signal, they had a lot of alarms going off on the bridge, and that was a real headache for the mariners. That's one feedback that we've got, because you've got bridge with all these different equipments, all of them getting the GPS feed. And it's not easy silencing all these alarms every second. They navigated for a few hours, between 2 to 5 hours, and then they ran aground unexpectedly in an area several miles away from where they thought the vessel should have been.
Well, why
Severe damage to the hull.
don't they have like inertial platform, other navigation? Because sorry to push you on that. In the frontline incidents, when I wrote my LinkedIn, I think there could be some lingering impact. A bunch of people told me no lingering impact. It doesn't really matter. People have redundancy in navigation. You're saying that some vessels actually have been impacted from a navigational perspective. Can you explain how and why?
Yeah, so Ami, redundancy here would be they'll have 2 electronic charts. They'll have 2 GPS receivers, but the source is still the same. It is GPS. There are very few vessels that would have additional or secondary sources like the GLONASS or the Galileo. So if you use GPS, you're basically navigating blind on all these vessels. And most of them are like that. Now, I'll make a distinction here. Vessels which are close to coastline, let's say rounding off the Hormuz, where the coastline is very sharp, you can actually make visual bearings and plot a position. Compare that to the coast of Oman or the Red Sea, where the coastline is pretty flat, and you don't really have a lot of conspicuous marks. So for a mariner, it's very difficult to plot a manual position and to know where the ship exactly is.
Because you would triangulate like I did in naval officer course. You would triangulate your location with 1 or 2 sites and see where you are, right? And just basically the coastal Mars is a big long desert, so you can't triangulate everything. It's like I'm triangulating with the sand. Okay, there's a lot of it. Is that the reason?
Exactly. You need the sharp points on the radar or visually outside to be able to triangulate your position. But these can exist.
I see we're all mariners here. Okay, so what type of casualties and claims are you seeing as a direct result of GPS jamming? Because it's quite interesting. I haven't seen a lot of that.
So grounding would be hull damage. That would be hull and machinery risk, right? The other one, which is very interesting, was disputes between owners and charterers. Now, these are commercial disputes, right? And the one we've shown up on the green color here is where a master, again in the Red Sea, they had finished loading in one of the Red Sea ports and they lost the GPS signal and all the vessels around them. And the master then refused to depart port, right? And this led to a lengthy discussion or a contractual dispute between owners and charterers. And this is still sort of ongoing right now. It was many days before the GPS signal was restored and the voyage was resumed. So that's another risk. And of course, there is an insurance sort of to cover that part also.
But which part of insurance covers that, by the way?
So these contractual disputes would be handled by the defense lawyers in Grad between the owners and the charterers.
So it's under FD&D? That's the...
Yeah. That is right. And if this is the right time, perhaps, Ami, I can touch upon some of the different insurance covers, so we'll come to that a bit later.
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Just because you mentioned FD&D and hull and P&I.
Now, I live the segue, Sid. I live the segue.
Now, a ship owner's insurance needs, right, would typically be covered by 3 covers. Hull and machinery, which is for the property, the machinery and the hull of the vessel itself. The loss of hire or the loss of earnings. And third would be the P&I, which is third-party liabilities. For example, your crew getting injured, or there's a pollution, or there's a cargo claim. But when we talk about Persian Gulf, right, a vessel is exposed to war perils. And that's a different risk altogether. And that's where the war risk insurance sort of kicks in. And it covers both your hull parts and the P&I or the liability part. Let me take maybe a hypothetical example for the audience to explain the difference here, right? So let's say a vessel is in Persian Gulf right now, which is a listed risk zone for JWA, and there is a war risk premium already paid, and the vessel is there. A crew member gets injured just by slipping on the stairs doing regular work. The normal P&I cover of the owner would kick in. But if the same crew member gets injured, let's say due to a drone attack, then the war risk insurance will have to respond for that. One thing that's very important for an owner is that they declare well in advance to the underwriters before the vessel enters all these listed zones. And then
although in London, sorry to challenge you that on the London market, that is not always the case. Sometimes you have a broker declaring actually in hindsight.
Yeah, that's a difficult discussion, Ami.
Am
I
I, am
would
I wrong? Am I wrong? Does
No,
that
no,
not
you're
happen?
right. You're right. It doesn't happen often.
Okay.
And Guard, of course, has its own digital tools to make sure that that does not happen. So we are tracking a fleet, and there are notifications made as soon as the vessel sort of crosses the boundary for all these listed areas. Another
Got it.
thing I must add is this is all from an owner's perspective. Now, charters also need to protect their exposure. So they have their own liability covers, which should not exclude war risks. So those covers are there in the market as well.
Okay, good time to be a works insurer, I have to say. The last 2 years, buy defense stock and become a war risk insurer. Nice. Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Sid, for that insight. But I don't think it stops with like the GPS jamming or safety. I think this is the real Donald Trump. I think saying that China can continue now to purchase oil from Iran. I don't know, Michelle. I don't work for OFAC, but I think I don't know. I think that Iranian oil is under heavy sanctions from the US. And now you have the president of the United States of America that says China can continue to purchase oil from Iran. What does that mean from your perspective? Like, and he says it was my great honor to make it happen. I'm not sure what this is. It happened. What does this mean? So can everybody buy oil right now from Iran, or only from Chinese? Or if I open a Chinese company, and can I now buy oil from Iran because maybe it's cheaper than whatever Saudi oil, whatever. What's happening here?
Well, this is super confusing and undermines the president's own executive order that he imposed on February 4 to go back to the maximum pressure campaign that we had seen on Iran. So I was in a room with some regulators when this news emerged, and I can say that the administration is probably just as confused as the oil market about what this means. I think it likely signals a de-escalation of Iran's sanctions enforcement, perhaps a new deal, and possibly an end to a 6-year sanctions regime. And if that's the case, is that an unwinding of the shadow fleet, of which there are about 500 plus ships that are just solely deployed for shipping US sanctioned Iranian oil and gas? And if that's the case, you've got 1.6 million barrels per day returning to the market. What does that mean for OPEC plus? It's a completely new can of worms that he's opened, because it's not a sanctions waiver, but maybe it's throwing Iran a bone without ripping up this maximum pressure deal. It adds to ambiguity, and it perhaps is signaling to Chinese adversaries as well. I mean, it is also a de facto acknowledgement of the failure of US sanctions on Iranian oil, which continue to flow despite 6 years of sanctions. It's an unprecedented and very unusual social media post.
Yeah, and I think obviously I agree with you. I think I can also add sanctions are regulatory, but enforcement of sanctions is geopolitical,
Of course.
I think. Right? So I think I'm not sure he's signaling that there's no sanctions anymore, but maybe he's signaling there's not going to be enforcement right now.
Exactly. But it's
when was the last enforcement by OFAC and Iranian sanctions?
Well, since February, I think more than 80 vessels have been sanctioned by the US for related to the Houthi.
So I think on June 20th, which is 4 days before this, the US Treasury added at least 5 Iran-linked individuals, 25 entities, and 3 vessels via OFAC. So June 20th, they sanctioned a bunch of vessels and people. In June 24th, it says China can now continue. Yes, I agree. It's confusing.
It's just whiplash on policy, and it's undermining, the reason for a lot of OFAC's work at the moment. So I'm not sure the oil market and traders and shipping has really had time to perhaps unpack what this means. But certainly, if you're looking for signals, and the administration and President Trump is very big on sort of flagging ahead what he intends to do. I mean, here's one thing to watch.
Okay, sounds good. I think I want to turn over to Q&A. I have already a bunch of questions here, which I'm going to start with. Feel free we have a couple hundred people here listening live to us already. So if you have any specific questions to Sid, to Tom, to Michelle, not sure if I can help, but I can try. Please feel free to write them in your Q&A sessions, and we'll do our best to We'll do our best to listen and advise. So question number one, will the slide deck and share briefing or recording will be available? I think yes. If you register with question number two, it's important to acknowledge the difference between AIS jamming and spoofing. Spoofing is much more dangerous because the ship may not know its AIS is degraded. Can anybody explain to me the difference between jamming and spoofing? Not, I can try.
In
but
simple words, Ami, jamming is sort of where your detector dies, and spoofing is where your detector lies. I mean, that's sort of the phrase I go by.
It's nice. So jamming is dies and spoofing is lies. Nice.
Exactly.
Don't die, don't lie. I think that's my guide for my life. Iranian GPS, I see interference is somebody says Iranian GPS interference is to degrade Israeli targeting capability, which use GPS. Yes, Martin, I agree. I would suggest targeting. I'm not sure Israeli targeting, and I'm sure people are aware of it. So there's all kinds of ways around it. Another question here from Dan. City asked us to remind you what do the pink countries represent here? So what do the pink countries represent?
So pink countries represent the listed areas by the Joint War Committee. So these are where the AP will be charged because there is an additional risk for the ships.
Yep.
Yeah.
Got it. Cool. Charlie asks, do we expect ship-to-ship operations off Malaysia to increase? Michelle, what do you think?
Well, I think for the time being, yes, because we've seen Iranian logistics, oil flows interrupted by the situation in the Persian Gulf. But I have to heavily caveat that because everything is so uncertain at the moment, and if there's further indications from the president that Iranian oil can go into China, that will negate the need for all these complex ship-to-ship transfer logistics chains, because just to remind the audience, Iranian oil just doesn't sail from the port of an Iranian port and then go straight to China, which is the only buyer of Iranian oil. It will go through the cargo will be transferred onto as many as 4 or 5 different vessels.
Why?
Ship-to-ship transfers.
Well, why? If there's no enforcement by China, why? Why did they go through all this mess? Sounds like a lot of trouble to me.
Well, I think firstly, it's because so many of the vessels have been sanctioned, and so they can't call at Chinese ports. Some of them do call still, but that's another story. But
yeah, there was all the teapot refinery thing conundrum, right, a month ago.
So some of them will call directly at teapot, but it just is another way to confuse the origin and the destination of the cargo. So you'll go from Iran to transfer in Fujairah, or maybe off Oman, then you'll go to Malaysia, then you'll perhaps go to somewhere outside China, and then it will go into the port. But of course, if there's signals that there is no longer going to be enforcement, then all of a sudden all that subterfuge is no longer necessary.
Oh, I see Peter is also on the line. Peter, I didn't see you joined. I thought you didn't join. How are you, Peter? I'm sorry. I thought you didn't join with us. So Peter, he is here from the UK Chamber of Shipping. I'm sorry I missed it because it wasn't on the video. Peter, what is the UK Chamber of Shipping telling its members? What are you seeing? Are we allowed to go in the Gulf, in the Red Sea? Are we not allowed to? Tell us what's happening.
Thanks, Amy, and sorry you didn't see me. I hope you can hear me okay.
Hey, but please, can you introduce yourself? I'm sorry, I didn't see you were on the line.
Yeah, sure. So I Director of Policy at the Chamber of Shipping, about 100 operators, and including a handful of charterers too. So we've got a fairly good understanding of the picture. I think there's obviously a number of factors here. The real one is uncertainty at the moment, knowing what's going to happen next. All the discussion that you've had thus far, things like masters being somewhat reticent to sail and having disputes with charterers, those have been going on in the background due to the jamming. As far as the uncertainty in the Straits is concerned, that Tom described really well, I think we perhaps have been surprised watching that nothing has happened. But then if you look at what's been going on in the whole region, it's perhaps not surprising, particularly because we haven't had much information as what the activity in Iran has been and what that means to the Iranian capability. I mean, the reality is the Red Sea was perhaps people were beginning to consider going back into the Red Sea. Certainly there have been discussions about that and movements in that direction. And then, of course, last week perhaps change things. But if we pursue the line that Mr. Trump tends to have, which is don't listen to what he says but see what he does, then one would assume that the risk to shipping is not as high as it perhaps is sitting at the moment in terms of insurance risk or other provisions. It's interesting because Sid very eloquently described how the IBF, which is the international agreements with the International Marine Employment IMEC guys, that doesn't have a particular clause for Straits of Hormuz, whereas other organisations, and including ours, we do have a clause that covers a warlike operations area in the Straits of Hormuz, such that there are provisions for the seafarers, including extra pay, extra insurance, and the opportunity to come off the vessel if they so desire. So I think the uncertainty is without doubt the word at the moment. I think we don't have accurate assessments of what has happened to the Iranian capability. We probably more worryingly, we don't really understand what the command and control situation in Iran is. And we've seen this before.
Well, sorry, what do you mean? It's not clear what the command control situation is. In what sense?
Well, in the sense of who's making decisions and what is being done. So whenever you take out a senior leadership team in a government, you get a situation where you don't control what is happening on the ground. And we've seen that before with activities involving arrested vessels, which were done by one part of the Iranian military and not really condoned by another part of the Iranian military. I'm thinking arrested vessels here. So the uncertainty.
So you're saying there might be a rogue thing by the RIGC, for example, which is not exactly top down to detain vessels as they go through the straits, for example.
I'm saying we don't know, but that could happen, and therefore there is uncertainty.
I agree.
And that will be in people's heads very much at the moment until
a
little
bit
bit more information is understood.
I have a follow-up question to you. What is, when you say UK Chamber of Shipping, what is UK? Is that UK ship owners? Is that UK sailors or captains? Is chief engineers, like
no, I see.
all of the above?
We are a trade association for shipping, so it's UK ship owners or those that have an interest in the United Kingdom, either through London, the Maritime Centre, or other activities such as offshore and ship management. And so we're about 100 ship owners and about 200 members total, including most of the P&I clubs, most of the law firms, etc.
So do you think this further bifurcates the market? Does this create an advantage for non-UK, non-US, non-Israeli ship owners and charterers to trade in these areas? Because if I'm Malaysian, right, or Singaporean, right, doesn't really matter right now. Does that give me an advantage to go in and do business there, and the UK people have to go do it somewhere else?
I think there are a lot of marginal advantages to certain organisations, but one's got to remember that most of the cargoes coming in and out do have controls by charterers that have some sort of nexus with those countries that you just mentioned, particularly the high volume piece. I think one thing I would say is the charterers in terms of information flow have been excellent with the operators in terms of what they've shared. And that's been a strength. It's why, whilst ships may have not transited at night for the reasons that Sid talked about from GPS jamming, or simply because they feel safer in that sense, flows have still happened. I think we're no more than 10%. I'll be corrected, but my understanding is no more than 10% down of transits of the Straits in the last few days. So there is confidence within the operators at the moment that they can operate safely. And I think a lot of that has been delivered by the charterers. So I don't see the market having significant changes, but what I do see is marginal gains. So we saw that in the Red Sea when certain vessels were given protection, which meant they had more confidence in going through the Red Sea, whereas other vessels didn't and therefore went around the Cape. I think we may see that in the Straits of Hormuz, particularly in the non-energy cargoes.
So I have a question to you and to both you and Tom. Aren't the Navy supposed to do just that? Like, isn't like the U.S. Navy charter is allow free trade, and both the UK and U.S. navies have been very active, I think, for some period and I think also the EU, by the way, in the Red Sea with the Houthi attacks. Aren't they supposed to make sure everybody can go in and trade? Isn't that like the idea?
Yeah, that's the core being. But 30 years of peace dividend has essentially eroded that ability in most navies to almost zero. I mean, when you look back at the 80s and the escorting effort that went on getting ships in and out of the Gulf, that was, we couldn't get anywhere near that now. Now, of course, the US Navy have 2 carriers sitting in the Gulf of Oman at the moment. They've got the third one heading across the Mediterranean, across the Atlantic now, heading the USS Ford. So they've got the carriers and they've got the ships. But the minute you start getting into escorting, you are now tying up lots of hulls and lots of people and lots of money. And you're putting yourself in harm's way as well. Again, if you start parading past all the threats that I outlined earlier, you're increasing that risk of miscalculation or the rogue IRGCN commander trying to make a name for himself. And now suddenly you're in the very fight that you've been trying to avoid. You've been sucked into it. So in the back of their mind will always be, can we do this from a sort of standoff position somewhere outside of the missile range in the Gulf of Oman? No one has the chance to properly escort anymore.
Peter, do you agree? Because your community and your stakeholders are the ones supposed to get in and out. And just like it's just not information, but maybe they could use a bit more certainty. What do you think?
So is that to me, Amy?
Yeah. So do you agree with Tom? So Tom's saying, listen,
I think,
maybe it's just safer to do this by a standoff,
I think we probably have seen this over the last, particularly but as 2019, we were doing, the Royal Navy provided a frigate for close escort to the post Steno Imperio incident. And that was stood up for a period of time for the on-call frigate in the Persian Gulf. Right now, we're in a different place entirely. So that's only, 6 years, where essentially there has been no planning operation, to our knowledge, between any of the navies to provide any sort of escort in that area. And actually escort in the Red Sea during the interactions with the Houthis was incredibly limited. There were some escorts, depending on what type of vessels and what flag. So a US vessel or a French vessel would probably be escorted if there was an available.
The French did a good job there. The French were very active. Yeah.
Though I think Tom would agree with me to say whether if there had been something fired at that group, whether or not they'd have been to defend it is questionable because we are talking a bit different range of threats here.
And I think it's always a bit harsh when the US critique their own Navy for not providing escorts. They were providing the missile pickets, so they were there in boxes, providing a shield for the various Houthi missiles that allowed the Aspides ships, the EU ships, to do that escorting. So that was kind of, although it was 2 separate operations, which was a little disheartening, they were at least coordinating at the highest level as to how they could both.
And maybe that's why President Trump is pushing NATO to have more capabilities, because basically you pull the US out of the picture, according to what you're saying, and nobody can defend the vessels. Maybe I'll segue to Sid and Michelle. There's a question here from the crowd. What would it take to bring the war risk down to pre-war times? Because now there's peace. I don't know. Trump said it. Did he not? I think he said it at one point.
Well, he's said lots of things, hasn't he?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think that's the issue, isn't it? Is what happens next? What does it mean?
Sid, from your perspective, what would it take to bring the worst down to pre-war times?
I agree with Michelle. The situation is so fluid, it's very hard to comment on that. Of course, we'll need the geopolitical tensions to go down to the pre-war levels. I mean, if that makes sense, and the threat level to, again, be reduced. No more GNSS interruptions, no more threat of the Iranian National Guard, and so on.
Peter, from your perspective, you run policy for the UK Chamber of Shipping. Well, when they ask you, what do we take? Because I don't know if there's going to be peace with Iran, right? I'm not sure these guys were saying, "Oh my God, we're friends now."
Amy, I don't think there's going to be a change to the current patterns of operations for the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, the threat is mitigated by the war risks, and they're currently operating. And at the moment, there is obviously reasonable amount of commercial certainty that those vessels can trade and return something, so they're doing it. The Red Sea slightly different. And I think there's a number of reasons for that, but the key one there is the uncertainty of knowing whether the Houthis are going to be as good as their word or not, and that's a problem. We don't know whether the proxy relationship has deteriorated to the point of non-existence, or whether there is still a proxy relationship. We don't know, as I said earlier, what the outcome of these activities last weekend are going to cause to the future of Iran and its command and control of its military. We just don't know those things. So I think it will be carrying on as we are at the moment, the Straits of Hormuz, with those daylight transits, perhaps a slight tick down on transits, but keeping that flowing. And then I think in the Red Sea, I think there will be a move towards, let's see what happens if someone goes through. But the first person to go through will be quite brave.
It's always correct, right, in life. Anonymous attendee says Trump sent a clarification on social media made a few hours later after the original one. Alert, all purchases of Iranian oil or petrochemical products must stop now. Any country or person who buys any amount of oil in capital letters or petrochemicals, capital letters, from Iran will be subject to immediately secondary sanctions. They will not be allowed to do business with the United States of America in any way, shape, or form. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. Michelle, based on history, I think somebody said here, the measure of Trump, what he does, not what he says. I think there are a lot of people buying Iranian oil and have not been under secondary sanctions. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I think the regulators are weighing up the best response and to get bang for their buck, because it is quite a complex investigation required in order to impose sanctions. Although they have targeted, I think, 3 teapots, those independent refineries in China that are the main beneficiaries. They have now targeted tug operators that have been involved in ship-to-ship transfers off Indonesia. They have targeted a wider variety of actors who have been involved. But the pace of sanctions, let's say, has definitely moderated in the past 6 to 7 weeks.
Interesting. Okay. Does Brian ask, does anybody here actually believe Iran can actually shut down the Strait of Hormuz? If so, for how long? I do not believe Iran has effective combat power to do this. Disrupt, yes. Close and keeping close. I do not believe so. Tom, what do you think?
No, they absolutely could. They absolutely could.
They absolutely could. I agree. I agree with that 100%.
They've got thousands of mines. They dump them in the Strait. War risk insurance climbs to the point where the Strait effectively becomes closed. And you've got to look at the Houthis and how hard we hit them before they eventually came to the table, right? And this is them time. This is the Houthis times 10, and they've done nothing but prepare for this. We must not write off the ongoing threat, and they won't. I don't think, for all the reasons I've said.
Yep.
They absolutely could. And then mine clearance. I mean, good grief! If you want to look at a mine clearance in a high threat environment, if you want to look at a painful, warfare process that takes weeks or months. And even then, you can never guarantee a corridor to 100%. There's always a 90%, 5 miles wide, 200 miles long, whatever. We're weeks or months, and we've both degraded. Us and the US have degraded our standing mine warfare capabilities there to quite a degree. So yes, they could do it. It would take a long time to clear up if they did. I'm pretty certain that they won't.
Yeah, Brian agrees with you. Sid, Peter, do you agree?
I completely agree with what Sam says. Yes.
Totally.
Well, it's interesting. But by the way, I'm not sure 2 weeks ago somebody would have predicted the last 2 weeks. So I think it's dangerous to give predictions nowadays, to say this for sure won't happen or this for sure won't happen, because it's the butterfly effect, right? Somebody does something and then somebody else does that and so forth. Maybe some people become brazen or not. What does Trump at the beginning of his last this administration has really hugged Putin and said, he's a good guy, and he'd absolutely believe what he says, and he actually, Ukraine should really thank him for not conquering all of Ukraine, because maybe he could have done that or should have done that, and now it looks like he turned a bit. So he shut down the Ukrainian intelligence for a while, or whatever, support for Ukrainian intelligence. And what does that mean for China and Taiwan? All I'm saying is the pace of things have gone so fast. You can't really know that. Morgan says, would China allow the Strait of Hormuz to close? Unlikely, you would think. Likewise, the US wouldn't want such antagonist to China, hence Trump's message. I agree with you, Morgan. China gets a lot of cheap oil from the space. There's another question here from Tahir. From Maria, what would happen to energy production if the Strait of Hormuz were to close again? Would it be traded over land, or would production come to a halt? Please help me, one of you.
I could probably just make a small comment there, Amy, just from local knowledge. But you're talking about 25% of the world's energy coming, liquid and liquid gas energy coming out of there at the moment. You would see that go down to about 3 to 5% by other means.
Wow,
no more.
Big deal.
That's
big deal.
How big it is.
Big deal. Okay. Tahir asks, wait a second, the first question. Keeping 12-day war perspective, how accurate AI models were to predict Iranian regime retaliatory actions in Strait of Hormuz? In your view, what actions in future conflict would qualify IRGC deciding to close Strait of Hormuz, Tahir, I don't think AI can predict what the Iranian regime will do. Okay. I think this is war games, maybe can predict it, and I'm not sure even that. I think what we're seeing is that AI can predict data. For example, GPS jamming, if you can ask me, I think we've learned a lot from what that means over the last 2 weeks. And we're already, as Windward, we're already implementing that in our algorithms, and our customers will get that in the next several days. And because now we have a lot more data, GPS jamming we didn't have before, we have, affected whatever, 12,000, 14,000 vessels. But I do not think at any point in time, right now, AI can predict Iranian regime retaliatory actions. That's more war games. Cameron says the U.S. carrier strike group, USS Nimitz, is on scene in the Strait of Hormuz now. What would their terms of engagement be? Are we getting to Iranian Revolutionary Guard? What level of engagement could they be tasked with to protect merchant shipping? I don't know, Tom. Maybe you or Peter knows. I don't.
Yeah, I mean, this would be there's a lot of destroyers with them as well. I think Vincent has 6, the Nimitz has a cruiser as well. I mean, there's a lot of surface ships there. So the carriers would sort of stay out of harm's way. There's an SSGN there, which is one of their extended submarines that can fire 150 Tomahawks. So they've got an awful lot of firepower there. And so if they wanted to set up an escorting operation in and out of the Gulf, I mean, again, you're now committing all those ships to a long effort, and there is sufficient supply ships still in the Persian Gulf. There's 3 heavy US ships there that could help with this. So I think it's doable. But again, the Straits of Hormuz is not somewhere you want to be operating in a warship unless you have to. And it suddenly becomes very expensive, and then they're achieving their end state. I mean, a bit like the Houthis were achieving quite an end state in terms of straining resources and getting the US to spend $1 billion in 3 months on missiles. These are end states in their own rights, so they will try and avoid it. But yeah, I mean, of course, you could set it up, but it's PACOM, the Pacific Command, are already looking at carriers disappearing over the horizon and going, hang on. Why are you going there? Isn't this the threat? So again, the US have these sort of constant global juggling acts to try and perform.
Sure, Peter.
Yeah, I think that what I would say is if you think through, if you're on the Iranian side, what would you do? And you clearly don't want it closed, but you want to have an effect. And if you think back to the Red Sea, the first thing they did was arrest a car carrier. And I'm surprised that something like that hasn't happened, in all honesty. That would have an effect both on insurance, but also on thinking strategy, and everyone would then be a little bit, really, really tight up in the West. So I'm surprised that they haven't done that to 1 or 2 ships and see what the reaction is.
So Scott said the geomagnetic storm activity solar flares prior to and enduring gave a favorable electronic warfare environment for strikes, staying with illumination. Thank you, Scott, for telling us that. I didn't know that. Tom, I didn't know if you knew that. I'm not in the know on that. And wait a second. There's an anonymous question here, maybe to you, Michelle. What are the red key flags regulators are watching for in ship-to-ship transfers or port calls near the strait?
What are the red flags that regulators
are watching for in ship-to-ship transfers or port calls near the straits?
Well, I think first of all, looking for vessels that are falsely flagged or under some form of sanctions, looking for vessels that have been flagged with some well, I call them 3rd or 4th tier flag providers. There's a lot of very small African nations that have now got into the business of flagging vessels that are using.
Could be a good business.
Yeah, it's a lucrative business for Gambia at the moment, for Sierra Leone, for Comoros, for a host of registries. But about 40% of flags, ships that are shipping Iranian oil are currently flagless. They have no flags. They're operating outside global maritime regulations and conventions, and about nearly 60% of all tonnage shipping Iranian oil is under some form of sanctions. So I always work on the basis that if I know what they're doing, I'm sure the regulators know they're doing. They're just picking their enforcement targets very carefully.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I don't think it's that easy to know what people are doing. If you're an expert in the field, been researching this for years, but if you're a bunker trader, then probably not. Tom, yeah?
Just on maritime domain awareness, I mean, this is being shown up. The lack of it is being shown up across the world, not just here. This is part of it. The fact that we're still reliant on an anti-collision device, we need the bad guys to turn that on and be honest with it, is pretty remarkable. So someone mentioned AI earlier. If there's one route that AI can carve through all of this, when it comes to sort of large language models, is the ability to track ships accurately, see whether they want to be tracked or not. And there are loads and loads of different technologies emerging to do that. Of course, it's all still proprietary, and everyone hangs on to that data and calls it classified. So there's a fair way to go. But I think maritime domain awareness sits across the whole industry. And
I agree. We built a company about 14 years ago when satellites were in the first days. Today, I think with ICE-I, synthetic aperture radar, the capabilities of Maxar, Planet, other upcoming constellations, I think we are seeing a tipping point in Earth observation and global scale that will allow to enrich that for sure. Charlie's asking, what effect did Israeli action against Iran impact Houthi capability in the Red Sea? That'll be my last question, then we'll wrap up. I know Peter, Tom, Sid, I have no idea what the answer is. So what impact the Israeli action against Iran had on Houthis?
I mean, I think I'll go first, but I'm going to calculate here, Amy. I think very clearly the connections between Houthis and Iran have been disrupted, and we don't know what that means because it's a long-term issue in terms of supplies and knowledge and capability. So there is that piece to it. In many respects, I think what we've seen, as I said before, what is said and what is done, the Houthis are kept very quiet. The question everyone said is that an indicator that some power has gone from Iran, or is that an indicator that they're biding their time? I think again, if you were to think from a Houthi perspective, you'd think there is not much to be gained by doing a huge amount right now, and I'll wait until a vessel returns to the Red Sea and then yet again stamp my authority on the region. I think that's more likely there. But
Makes
again,
sense.
I'm speculating.
Okay, finishing thoughts. We have a couple more minutes to wrap up. Sid, how about you start? Where are we going?
Our sort of takeaways from our side, right? Very quickly, insurance implications. Engage with the war insurance very early on and understand the nuances of different covers. Second, about charter parties for commercial disputes. Know what the clauses say. If not, approach your defense lawyers. The last one, and most importantly, we haven't really touched upon a lot, and I was hoping somebody will ask us a question on other seafarers, right? They are facing all these insecurities because if a ship faces GPS interruption, gets hit by a drone or a missile, they have to respond on it to the emergency. So understand the insecurities, explain them their rights, prepare them for the emergencies. It's not just the physical preparedness of the ship, it's also their mental preparedness, right? And they need the comfort that the owners and managers are behind them, supporting their decision on the ground.
Completely. I completely agree. It's the people actually making the global trade happen. As an ex-seafarer, I agree. Tom, last thoughts.
For me, the one constant through all these variables and unpredictability and violence is the threat of miscalculation. That has not gone away right now. And we, as Peter said, we don't know where the supreme leader is on this. We know he has direct links to the IRGCN, but what's he saying? And what is the ambitious young commander who wants to make a name for himself thinking and doing?
Yep.
That's been a risk throughout. It remains,
especially when all the upper commanders are gone.
Yeah.
So maybe now there's an opening.
It could be, and they have rapidly promoted people who have taken bold decisions in the past. So miscalculation for me is the constant here. If they are to reopen this, then I would expect it probably to start via the Houthis in the Red Sea, because it creates an enormous force flow problem immediately. You have to split the carriers. So if it happens deliberately, it'll be in the Red Sea. But for me, the real risk is it sparking off again by accident.
Sure. Peter?
Yeah, I agree with that. In the sense of the naval war, as far as ship flows are concerned, I think it's more likely that we'd see a rogue activity somewhere in the Straits of Hormuz. That's more likely to be the next step. But we could be here in 2 weeks' time and nothing has happened. That's the reality.
We could also be according to Trump, it can either be a full-out war or peace in a week's time. Who knows?
Indeed.
But follow Truth Social. Michelle?
Well, I think until there's any certainty, you'll see European, American operated and affiliated ship owners and charterers probably avoid, if they can, the area. So I think that's probably quite likely. We've seen some of the big Greek ship owners come out and say that they're not going to be accepting charterers for the time being. So I see that uncertainty flow down, and perhaps that will add some, mean that freight rates will probably firm even if the oil price remains lower.
Interesting. Okay. And for me, thank you very much for joining this webinar. Sid, Tom, Michelle, and Peter. Again, apologies, I haven't seen you on the video in the first 30 minutes. My apologies. Thank you very much for joining it with us and kind of sharing your thoughts and expertise. People wrote me great things about this webinar. And if anything, stay informed, stay in touch, and ask for guidance. And we'll keep on tracking the situation as it progresses. Have a great weekend, everybody, and let's hope for peace.